All right, welcome to this webinar, everybody. My name is Jeff Batt, and we're going to go ahead and get started. It is the time scheduled on the webinar, so I just want to get started right away because we have a lot to cover. Go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Actually, let me minimize some things. All right. So like I mentioned, my name is Jeff Batt, and I am here with Calidus Cloud Learning. I am the Design Manager, Director of Conferences, and Interaction Developer with Calidus Cloud Learning, specifically on the Rapid Intake side. Rapid Intake is an authoring tool, and then Calidus Cloud also has a learning management system, which is called Litmus. Now, like I mentioned in the well, actually, before we get started on that, let me just go ahead and go over little housekeeping items. If you have any questions, feel free to type in the question section. Type in your questions. I may not, in fact, I probably won't get through all of them, but if I do have a chance to stop here and there, take a look through the questions, see if there's any questions that are really standing out, I'm more than happy to answer those questions as we go through. If not, I do want to get through most of the content, focus on the content, and then I can either answer those questions after, or you can email me afterwards as well. So if one thing I do want to, before we get started here, one thing I do want to say is I am the director of conferences for our eLearning DevCon conference. And right now we're submitting, or we have a final call for proposals. So if you are an expert in any tool that you may have, like Flash, Photoshop, Dreamweaver, Articulate, Lector, anything like that, we definitely want to hear from you. Our conference is being held in May at the ARIA in Las Vegas. So go to elearningdevcon.com and submit your proposals right away. But we already have some great proposals submitted, so we want to hear from the majority or anybody else that may want to submit some proposals. So go ahead and do that. All right, so there are some sample files that I have for you guys here, and you can get to it through this website. And this basically will have all the project files that I'm going to go over. This will have sample files. This will also have all my presentation notes, all my slides in both Keynote, PowerPoint, and also PDF formats. And so all the information that I'm going to use, go ahead and write down this website. And if you're watching this in a recording, you can pause this as well. And you can use this as a reference for later as well, or you can follow along if you want to try to do that as well. So I'm going to leave this up here for a second. All right. Now, I do want to make sure that my audio is coming through. So if you can hear me, go ahead and type in the chat area or the question area that you can hear me. I don't need a lot of responses, but just a couple. Okay, I'm getting some responses, so not everybody needs to respond here anymore, but it looks like we're good to go. Okay, so those are the files, and when you download those files, let me actually show you what you'll get. And so I talked a little bit about it already. And you'll get the PowerPoint, the PDF, the Keynote files. You'll also get some zip files, some code files that I'll talk about a little bit. And then you'll get some sample files here, both for different types of interactions, and then a tab interaction that's more generic that hopefully we'll get enough time to actually go through that a little bit later. But those are the files that you'll get once you actually download those. Okay, so what will we be covering in this session? I want to go over a couple different session objectives. We'll talk about where you get Adobe Edge. This is from Adobe specifically, and I'll talk about how to get it, how to install it, and everything like that. And then we'll talk about some of the resources that you can use to really learn Edge, because honestly, you're not going to learn Edge within a 90-minute period. Actually, I'm getting some audio in the background. Hold on one second. So we'll talk about where do you get Adobe Edge. We'll also talk about some of the resources that you can use, because again, you're not going to learn all of this in 90 minutes. So hopefully I'm going to point you to some resources that you can use to really learn to pick up some of the animation techniques and everything like that. We'll talk about exploring the Edge Animate user interface and show you how to, or the different parts of the user interface. If you're familiar already with Adobe products, it is very similar to other Adobe products, but we'll talk about some of the differences. There are some differences in Adobe Edge compared to Flash or anything like that. So we'll talk about using external assets, flexible layouts, which is one of my favorite features in Adobe Edge. We'll also talk about animating using keyframes, how you can use just manual keyframes, and then also talk about how to use the pin to animate. Now the pin is unique to any other Adobe products, and it's quickly become one of my favorite features inside Adobe Edge because it makes animating a whole lot easier. If you're coming from Flash on how to animate with keyframes and everything like that, once you get used to the pin, you're going to absolutely love it. I promise that. We'll also talk about easing with animations, how you do different easing effects and everything. It's very simple to do. Then talk about symbols and nested symbols. If you're familiar with Flash and how to animate in Flash, this will become very familiar, or this will be very familiar inside of Adobe Edge. It's a little bit different. We'll talk about what those differences are as well. And then talking about scripting, using Edge Animate, using the code panel, and how you actually use script with Flash. It's compared to, or you're using ActionScript with Edge, you're using JavaScript and also jQuery. They have it very integrated with jQuery. We'll talk about timeline labels, how you can add different labels within the timeline, timeline triggers, playing audio within the JavaScript, which is not easy to do, but there is a workaround to do. We'll talk about down level stage and actually what happens if someone goes to this from a non-HTML5 compatible browser. Instead of just seeing a blank screen, you can actually control what they see and the instructions how to get back to this through an HTML5 compatible browser. Because the content that we're producing here is HTML5, so keep that in mind, that they have to have a compatible HTML5 browser in order to actually view the content, the deployment. And then we'll talk about deployment, how to get this out, different areas that you can actually deploy to as well. Okay, so where to get Adobe Edge? The first thing is you go to html.adobe.com. Now, Adobe has a focus right now on making their tools compatible, or actually focus on HTML and making and really improving HTML. And so they're actually providing Edge and a couple other tools for free. So if you go to html.adobe.com, you can download Adobe Edge Animate right now. Some other tools are still in the works, but you can download it, Edge Animate, for free. It also comes as part of the Creative Suite if you have that already, so go ahead and if you log in, you can install that, and it's already there in your list of the the Adobe Creative Suite as well. Now, one question that did pop up is is this webinar being recorded? And yes, it is being recorded, so you can refer back to this at a later time. Okay, so now we're going to talk about getting to know the Edge Animate user interface. So when you first pull up Edge Animate, this is the screen that you see. So you see over on the left-hand side, you can access any recent files, you can open, you can create new files. On the right-hand side, it does have 4 different tabs up on top where it says Getting Started, Key Features, Resources, and then Quiet. Now, Getting Started will show you a list of different tutorials and everything, and we'll go through that a little bit. Getting started shows you how to quickly get started. It shows you a step-by-step process to get started with Adobe Edge. It then shows you how to create different objects, how to create different shapes, text, and different things in there. It'll also show you how to animate. Now, this first one is animate manually, adding keyframes and then going through and adding different transitions and tweening and different things like that. Now, the second one is actually how to animate with the new version, or with the new feature of the pin, which again is one of my favorite features. And then it talks to you about how to resize. Now, when you're working with mobile, you're working with many different screen sizes. So you're working with phones, you're working with tablets, you're working with tablets that are 10.1 inches, you're working with tablets that are 9 inches, 7 inches. And so it makes it really hard to really know how do I adapt my content to really target the different tablets or target different phones or anything like that. Well, the resize function actually allows you to do that, to actually make it so it's flexible, so it will adapt to the different sizes that you may be targeting. Now, it will also walk you through on how to extend, how to customize and add on scripts and everything like that, and then how to use symbols, which is the reuse part, how to create different timeline symbols and actually share those between different projects. You can, if you create a symbol in one project, you can actually save it so you can bring that into other projects as well and use those inside of a Edge Animate with other projects. Now, whenever you click on any of these lessons, what happens is it shows up on the right-hand side of your Edge Animate user interface, and it tells you through, or it walks you through step by step on how to do these different tutorials. And so it'll explain the different buttons. It'll explain everything on there. So they're really helpful, really useful lessons that you can walk through on there. Now, the key features will let you know any key features or new releases that have come out. And so this is important just to kind of review every once in a while and to know if there's any releases and how to find out more information on it. Resources will actually link you to Adobe TV and show you Edge Animate help and tutorials and links and different things that you can use to really get to know Adobe Edge. Some other resources that are not specifically targeted on Adobe Edge right now are lynda.com is a great resource. They have a whole section on Adobe Edge specifically. I do some of my own tutorials on my blog, kinetic-media.com, so if you want to check those out. Adobe Edge tutorials aren't up there yet, but I am working on those. There's also some web links, Edge Commons. Edge Commons has some extensions that I really like, some examples of how to do different things, and so that's a great resource, as well as Adobe TV. You can go to Adobe TV and then start watching some tutorials. They have some great tutorials there. Okay, so let's get into the actual content. I like to show you how to do stuff, how to actually use stuff. And so let's actually get into the content and start building some things. So when you're ready to create a new project inside of Adobe Edge, you'll notice on the left-hand side the Open File, Recent Files, and Create New. Now, if you create a new project, what happens is once you save it inside of a folder, it includes a couple different things inside of your project. It includes some JavaScript files, specifically to Edge. It also includes a project file. If you're familiar with Flash, Flash also included a project file, and that project file opens up Adobe Edge. It can't be viewed on the website, or it can't be viewed anywhere else. It's only used to open up Adobe Edge specifically. And then an HTML file, the main HTML file, that if you click on that, you can see the end result there. So let's go ahead and go into Edge here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a project. So I'm going to come over on the left-hand side. I'm going to go ahead and click on Create New. And you'll notice that it starts me out with my project here. I have my properties on the left-hand side. I have my stage area in the middle. I have on the right-hand side elements and libraries and different things like that. Now I'm going to save my project first of all. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Save. Now it's going to pop open where I want to save my project. And I want to save my project specifically on my desktop for this example. So I'm just going to go ahead and just create a folder. It's nice to have everything inside of a folder. So I'm going to create a folder and just call it Test for now. And then I'm going to click on Create here. And now you can name this file whatever you want. But specifically, I like to name it Index, because if you're bringing this inside of another project, you want this to be the main file. You can include other files, but you want your index, and just a standard between web developers and everything, but you want your main file to be Index. Now what happens is if it's created this folder on my desktop, so just like in the image on my PowerPoint, there we have all the different JavaScript files, we have the main index file, and then we have this index.an file, which is the project file, and all that does is pull up Adobe Edge. So if I close it out, if I double click on that, it'll pull up Adobe Edge. Now under the Edge_includes, what this does is it also includes jQuery. Some JSON, some Edge, other minimization JavaScript. So once you actually publish, it publishes the minimized version of the JavaScript, which makes your files a little bit smaller and everything. But these are all the different project files that you're going to start out with. So let's go ahead and explore the user interface a little bit. Now, the first area that I want to explore is the stage area. The stage area has just a white area. It's very similar to if you're working with Flash, for example. You can drag and drop anything into the stage area and then move around that into the stage area in the position that you want. But then it also has a ruler on the top and the left-hand side. Now, you can take those just like you can in Flash or Photoshop or anything like that. You can start and you can click on that top ruler, and then you can drag down to have some guides. If you want to have some guides to help align things, you can do that as well. Now, that's pretty much it with the stage area. And if you have multiple different projects open, up on the index, the tab area will have a way to actually switch between those different projects if you can have multiple projects open up at one time. Otherwise, you can just exit out of the project just by clicking on the X on the tab, and that will completely exit out of the project that you might be working on at that time. So over on the left-hand side, usually you have, and you can switch these tabs to whatever position you want, but over on the left-hand side is the properties area. Now, the properties area has a couple different things that I want to point out here. The first thing is the width and height. Now, this is where you define the width and the height of the actual interaction. Now, I'll show you a little bit how you do this when you're making it flexible so it adapts to whatever size it is. But right now, you can just enter in the width and the height in pixel format. And then there's also the stage color. So just like Flash, if you click on that, it'll pull up a little color wheel, and then you can select which color you want to have the stage area to be. And then there's a minimum width and a maximum width. Now, this is really useful when you're making flexible layouts, and we'll explore that here in a second. But this is saying, okay, if you're going to make a flexible layout, there might be a time where you don't want it to go below a certain width, or you don't want it to go beyond a certain width. So you want it to be flexible, but you want to stay at, okay, I'm going to make it flexible, but anything below 300 pixels, I mean, that's a little too small, and it's just going to be a lot more work. So you want to kind of condense that and have a minimum width and a maximum width, and that's usually where you'll change that. Now, overflow means that if you have an object like your stage area, what happens to the content that's kind of outside of that area? Do you want it to be hidden? Do you want it to have a scroll bar? Do you want it to have whatever you want? You can do that on a per object level. So when you select an object, like text, for example, if you want text to be in a certain area and you want that text to be scrollable, then you can go ahead and select that. So then the other thing, and we'll explore this here a little bit, is autoplay. If you want it to just automatically start playing the timeline, you can do that. Composition ID is more specific for code. You can change that. With working with Edge for the past little while, I have not run into one situation where I've had to change that. Down level stage is what happens when a learner goes to this interaction from a non-compatible HTML5 browser, and we'll explore that here in a second. And then the poster image is also what has to do with if you're going to bring this inside of iBooks author, or if you're going to bring this inside of the down level stage. There's a couple different things you can do there. And then a preloader. Now, one thing I always found out, or I always found a little bit hard when I was working with Flash, when I was first starting with Flash, is how to create a preloader. Well, with Adobe Edge Animate, creating a preloader is a snap. It's basically, it just makes sure it loads all of your content before it's visible, and you can actually go in and define what the preloader looks like, choose from different samples, add on some text as well. And so Adobe Edge makes it really easy to add this preloader, and it's a couple button clicks, and you can customize it beyond that, but to get started, it's actually very easy. So okay, so I'm going to go back into Adobe Edge, and I'm going to explore this a little bit. So you'll notice over on the left-hand side, now I'm going to zoom up on the recording so you can see this a little bit better, and zoom out on the recording. But for now, I apologize if it's a little bit small. I'm trying to make it so the recording is a perfect size as well. But you'll notice over on the left-hand side, we have width and height. Now, I can link that width and height, so if I change it, it'll actually adjust the width and the height proportionally. But there's also a little button. If I hover over where it says the PX right here, there's a little button that if I click on that, it actually toggles that to 100%. It toggles it from pixels to percentage. So what happens is, let me go ahead and just change the background color here in the stage area. And let me go back to the pixels, and you'll notice if I hit Command Enter or Control Enter, it will actually preview my interaction, but it will preview within a set section with a minimum width and a height, basically. Now, if I want my content to automatically adapt to the width and the height that's available, then I would come into the stage area. So I'm going to come back into Adobe Edge, and I'm just going to turn on the pixels, and let's just do the width for now. I'm just going to click that button where it says pixels, and it's going to toggle it to a percentage. Now, if I hit Control Enter, it's actually going to take 100% of that width, whatever width is available. Let's say I don't want 100%. Let's say if I only want 80%, then I can come over and I can change that to 80%. Now what happens is whatever my browser is, and so if I resize my browser, it's only going to take 80% of my browser window, whatever browser it is. Now you may not always know what 80% is, and so it's up to you at that point, just kind of play around with it, but I'm going to change this back to 100. And now I'm going to come to the height. Now the height, if I go ahead and I flip the percentage on there, I don't have to do the height. You can do the height and the width. But if I hit Control Enter, now it's going to take 100% of my browser, my width and my height of my browser. And so it's basically just by 2 button clicks, you automatically have it so no matter what the browser size is, it's going to automatically adjust to that. Now, like I mentioned before, you may not always want that to happen because if you have, for example, let's go ahead and just add some text here. I'm going to add some text on the screen, and we'll talk about how to do that in a little bit. Okay. So now if I hit Control Enter, you'll notice my text is on the right hand side because I aligned that to the right hand side. My other text is on the left hand side. Now if I'm always set at a maximum 100% width and a maximum 100% height, what happens is if I start resizing this browser, you'll notice that actually my browser limits it, but if I don't have a browser that limits it, it would actually, the text would start overlapping. And so that's one thing to keep in mind, that you may want to come down here and go back to the stage area. You'll notice my properties changes to depending on what I have selected. But if I just select the stage area, it'll go back to my main properties. And I may want to set a minimum width in order to actually say, okay, I don't want it to go below a certain percentage. And so I'm just going to set that at 500 pixels, for example. Now, it will still take 100% width, but if I go ahead and start minimizing it, at a certain point, it'll stop at the 500 pixels, and then I can do a maximum width. Now, in order to do maximum width, I have to select on the maximum width button, and then uncheck where it says none, which is a little confusing in my opinion, but if I select, I say, okay, maximum width is going to be 600, you'll notice that if I preview it, it's not going to go beyond 600 pixels. It will go below 600 pixels, and so it'll start resizing at that point, but it's not going to go below 500. So it takes a little getting used to. It takes a little playing around with it from what I've noticed. But it makes it really flexible if you want to make sure that it resizes, because tablets are so many different sizes. It makes it really flexible if you get used to that type of programming and different things like that. So. One question that popped up is the stage size the same as the canvas area in HTML5? I haven't looked into that specifically, but I believe it is the same size as the canvas. All right, now let's go ahead and that's how you start out with the size and the properties. So let's go back into the presentation here, and I'm going to skip all these here and go back into the next slide. Now we're going to talk about the timeline. Now the timeline is where you start animating different things, and it's very similar to Flash's timeline, but there's a couple differences here that I want to talk about. And I actually think I wish that Flash had the same type of timeline. I hope they make these types of improvements inside of Flash. Whenever I'm animating inside of Flash, it'd be nice to have some of these. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is the player controls. You have play, you have rewind, you have forward as well up on the top left-hand side. Now you also have the auto keyframe, and you can toggle this off and on. So this will actually auto keyframe when you start when you start moving different objects, as well as auto transition. Now those are two different things. It might sound the same, auto transition and auto keyframe, but they're really two different things. And let me show you what the differences are there. Let me go ahead and delete these, and I'm going to change the color of my stage area back to white. And I'm going to go ahead and create a box. Up on the top is where my tools are, and I'm just going to create a box that I can work with here. Now, in my box, if I add or if I turn on where it says auto keyframe, and for now I'm just going to turn off where it says auto transition mode. In the auto transition mode, it'll create the tween between the different keyframes. But in the auto keyframe mode, what will happen is if I start to move here, let me just go ahead and first of all add a keyframe, or let me move over here. You'll notice that it adds a dot wherever I just moved it from. Now I needed to add a dot at the very first, so let me move that back. But at the very first, with the auto keyframe on, whenever I move it, it's basically just going to add a dot at different positions of the timeline. Now it doesn't animate it, it just says, okay, once it gets to this point, it's going to jump up there. Once it gets to that point, it's going to jump up there. Well, that's nice, but I really want to animate it so I don't have to do all that work. And so in order to do that, I need to have two different things on. I need to have the auto keyframe on, and I need to have the auto transition mode on as well. You'll notice the shortcut keys X and then K are shortcut keys in order for you to toggle those off and on as needed. Now the auto transition, if I have that turned on, what will happen is, let me first of all create a keyframe here. Add keyframe, I'm just going to do size and location. And now if I move my playhead, this red line here, I'm going to move it a little bit further down in my timeline. And then I'm going to go ahead and just move my box there. Now what happens is it animates whatever it animates that's in the, and it creates a tween in between the two different keyframes. So it's creating the keyframes, but it's also creating a tween between the two different keyframes. So if I move my timeline here, or my playhead, it's going to show me the animation, kind of like it does in Flash as well, where there's that tween. You can right-click on the timeline and create a motion tween. This is very similar to that. Now, you can notice down at the bottom in the stage area, you'll notice all the different properties that are being tweened. For now, it's just the left and the top. We're not really animating any width and height, and so I could really just select those keyframes and then just hit the delete button. And those keyframes will go away. I'm just actually focused right now because I'm just moving it on the left and the top, because it's moving left or right and it's moving up and down. That's the left and the top basically. So those are the different options for that. And if I just move that, I can pretty much grab my animation and move it to wherever I want. And then I can go ahead and do the same thing here. If you can continue adding on to the keyframe, or you can if you wanted to just add another keyframe here and then move it somewhere else. You'll notice that you can separate your different tweens as well, instead of it having all connected in one area. Okay, so that's the player controls, as well as the auto keyframe mode and the auto transition mode. And then the next button right next to the auto transition mode is the pin mode, the auto toggle pin mode. This basically allows you to use the new way of actually animating, which I find absolutely awesome in order to animate. And so I'm going to show you how to do that here now. So I'm going to skip back into Adobe Edge. I'm going to get rid of the animations that I already did. And I'm going to turn off, actually I'm going to keep the auto transition on, but I'm going to turn on the toggle pin mode. Now the toggle pin mode works a little bit different than you might expect. If you click on the toggle pin mode, you'll notice in your playhead a little blue dot. I'm going to turn that off and on so you can see that little blue dot that goes above the yellow bar there. And that blue dot basically allows you to grab and stretch out either forward or backwards any point of time in the animation. So let's come out a little bit more. You'll notice if I go backwards, the bar is actually yellow in this timeline, and if I go forward, the bar actually turns blue, because the toggle pin mode works a little bit different if you're going to animate from a certain location or to a certain location. Now, the blue actually stands for where you're going to, or where the current point of this image is actually, or whatever object you have selected is currently. So that means that if I want to, let's say, animate this from where it is currently to somewhere else, then I'm going to go ahead and take this blue dot, and I'm going to say, okay, the blue dot is where it's going to start from currently, and then I'm going to move it to where I want it to happen, or where I want it to end up. And so now you'll notice if I take my playhead, it started from where I had it before because that's where the blue dot was, but now it's going to move to whatever position I changed it to. So it's the opposite if I go the different or the other direction. So if I take my blue dot and I move it forward a little bit, that's where it's going to end up because that's where the current position is. That blue dot is where the current position is. So if I want it to this is where I want it to end up, but I want it to animate from outside of the stage area, then I'm going to go ahead and move that outside of the stage area. Now what happens is my timeline, if I move that, you'll notice that it automatically moves my square into where it was before I started animating it. Now the reason why I like this, I'm going to go ahead and toggle this off right now. The reason why I like this is because if I'm animating in some bullet points, for example, and I want these bullet points I want to kind of align the bullet points. Let me just add some bullet points here. I want to kind of align this up before I actually start animating it. So I'm going to get everything into position. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my playhead, and I'm going to toggle in the pin mode, move my blue position forward because I want this to be the current location where it ends up. And then I'm just going to move my test 1 over there and my test 2 off the stage as well. And just simple movements, and now I have my my animations coming in, and I can move those, separate them a little bit, but now I have my animations coming in at different times as well. And all I had to do was position them where I wanted to end up and then just move them off the stage with that toggle pen, and it makes it a lot quicker than working with something like in Flash, keyframes like that as well. So now you can toggle the pin mode with this button, or you can also double click on the yellow bar, the playhead bar, and if you double click on it, that will actually go into the pin mode, and if you double click on it again, it'll actually go out of the pin mode. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but I highly recommend using the pin mode when you're animating. It'll help speed up the process a lot quicker than what you may currently be doing as well. So let me just make sure there aren't any questions in that. There are some questions on what a keyframe is and what a tween is. Typically, those are standard wording for any type of animations, and so if you have any questions like that, we can address them at a later time. But keyframes are the point of what's going to, if something's different going to happen, or the point where an object is going to go. And then a tween is the animation from one point to another point, and that's a quick explanation for that. So okay, so going back into to my timeline, we're exploring the timeline area here. Then we'll get into creating how to create a tab interaction. Sorry, these animations are a little slow, so I'm trying to get through them quick. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the easing options. Now, the easing options allows you to actually ease in certain objects or ease out certain objects as well. And this is really what creates the cool effect, kind of the bounce effect or anything like that when you're animating. And so it's not just all a straight animate from one line to the next line. It could speed up a little bit and then slow down, or it can slow down at first and then speed up. And so there's a couple different objects and tweens that you can actually do with an Adobe Edge. Now let's go through this entire slide first, and then I'll show you the examples here in a little bit. There's also the timeline bar. This will actually show you the timeline, how to go through, or it basically keeps track of where you're at in the timeline. Now, Adobe Edge is different than Flash. Flash uses keyframes. Adobe Edge actually uses milliseconds. It uses time. And so that's one thing to keep in mind is you're not working with keyframes anymore. You're actually working with time and milliseconds and everything like that. So you'll notice up on the timeline where it has 1, 2, 3, those are seconds, but you'll notice right by the playhead, it says 0.0 or 0.406. That's a millisecond right there. So that's one thing to keep in mind is when you're working with these animations, you're working with milliseconds instead of keyframes. Now, then you have your object layers, your different, on the left-hand side, your different objects, whatever you've brought on the stage, whether it be text or whether it be different squares or circles or images or anything like that, that'll show up on the layer. Now, even if you've grouped certain items, each item within that group will still show as a separate layer unless you've made it into an actual symbol or a movie clip or anything like that. Okay, then you have timeline triggers. Now, timeline triggers is when you want something different to happen at this point. Let's say at 5 seconds, I want the animation to stop. And then I'm going to add a button that will actually continue the animation, but I want the animation to stop at 5 seconds. That's what a timeline trigger is. So whenever you're working with a timeline and you want it to stop at a certain point, then that's really what you would have to do. Now that becomes important with the interaction that I'm going to show you today because it's actually how you, if you have different pages in your interaction, in your learning interaction, then you want to create a bunch of different stop interactions and timelines on different parts of your timeline, and then you're going to jump between those different timelines to show different parts of the page. And so I'll show you how that's done in a little bit, but that's the timeline triggers is really important, as well as the timeline labels. Timeline labels will actually allow you to name, because you're not working with keyframes like we talked about, so you can't specifically say, okay, jump to the 500, number 500 keyframe. You actually have to have a certain label unless you wanted to type in the millisecond of where you wanted to jump, because you can do that. But it's easier if you label certain points in your timeline and say, okay, this is option 1, this is option 2, this is option 3. And then when you're adding the functionality to your buttons, you say, okay, jump now to option 1, jump now to option 2. And so the timeline labels is very important, and we'll work with that in a little bit here. And then manual keyframe, the little diamonds right next to any property allows you to manually enter a keyframe. Which again, a keyframe is something when something different happens. It's in a different position, or it's a different size, or it's something different is happening, and that's what a keyframe is. And then the tween is basically animating from that other keyframe to the new keyframe, basically. And then the animated property will show you what the properties are. You got left, top. Whenever you start animating inside of the property panel, it'll start adding that to the list. And this is very similar to if you've worked with anything like After Effects or anything like that. It's very similar. It'll list out the different effects that are getting animated to. And then you can zoom in and zoom out on your timeline, and so you can get a bigger picture of your animations or a smaller picture as well of your animations. And then down at the bottom, you have a couple different things that if you wanted to show a grid, timeline snapping, and then show only animated properties. And so it'll hide all the different layers that are not being animated. If you want to focus just on your animation, those are the different buttons down at the bottom. Okay, so let's take a look a little bit at these different things that we just talked about. So the first thing is the easing. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my square again. And I'm just going to create the pin. And I'm going to animate this over to the bottom right hand side. And now if I hit Control Enter, you'll notice my animation just moves from the top to the top left hand side to the bottom right hand side. It really doesn't have any effects to it, or it's just a quick animation. So that's where easing comes into play. If I select my animation, or I can select if I just want to animate or ease like the top, or if I just want to ease the left, I can select just one of those. But if I want to ease all of them, then I select the top bar here and then select the easing linear button over right by my toggle pin button. And if I select that, it'll pop open with the different easing options that I have available to me. So I have a linear, which just basically goes straight from one point to the next point. But then I also have easing in, easing out, easing in and out, and then swing. And the nice thing about Edge is it gives you a little visual, because I don't always remember how these are going to work. But in the visual here, you can see that it kind of starts out slow, the easing in, and then it ends up a little bit quicker. So if you want it to start out slow and then go quick, you can do that. Or easing out starts out quick and kind of ends in a little bit slow. And then easing out and in will actually do both. So it'll start out slow, go a little quick in the middle, and then kind of finish out a little bit slow as well. So I'm going to do easing in here, and you have a couple different options. You have quad, cubic, expo, back, elastic. And so if you just select one of those, hit enter, and then hit control enter, you'll notice that was pretty quick, but it kind of bounced a little bit before it went over. And I'm not sure how well that transferred over to GoToMeeting, but it bounces over a little bit. And if I want to, I can just select that again, go back to my easing window here. And instead of elastic, let's go ahead and try cubic or quart and hit control enter. You'll notice that it kind of started out a little bit slow and then went, and it makes it a little bit nicer instead of just having a direct cut to it. And or you can have the little bounce effect or anything like that. So one question that popped up is Edge really still free? Last time I was at the site, among the apps you had to pay for it to download. Edge is still free, and from the Adobe's plans, they plan to continue to still make it free as well. And if you go to, that may change, but that's the last I heard of, and it is free. If you have Creative Suite, it's already there within your tools as well. Okay, so that is the easing. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple other options down at the actions layer here. We talked about the timeline triggers. At any point of your timeline, you can add a trigger, and if I select this little kind of brackets with a diamond in the middle here, if I select that, what will happen is it'll open up my triggers, my different things that I can add within this trigger. Now over on the right hand side is a quick shortcut thing to different, the most commonly used code. So you don't even need to memorize the code here, but you can see that if I want to stop the timeline, I can go ahead and stop the timeline by selecting the stop, and it adds a sim.stop, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and basically that just stops the timeline at wherever that trigger is. Now I have that trigger right in the middle, or right before this, I'm going to move it right before this animation. So if I hit control enter, it's never going to animate unless I add a button that will then start it to animate in that timeline, but that's what triggers do. At that point in the timeline, it's going to stop until you continue it. If I don't want that, I can select it and hit delete. Now on the timeline labels right above that, you can insert a label, and you pretty much can name this whatever you want, but I'm just going to name this home for now. And then I can just select that label and move it pretty much wherever I want as well. Now this is really useful when you're going to different pages. So there's my home. If I want to create a new page, for example, called option 1, then I'm going to go ahead and create option 1 right on my timeline. And so let's go to the second timeline here, and I'm going to go ahead and create option 2. And now those are labeled, so I can go ahead and add different position animations and anything in that section, whatever I want. So the labels are very useful when you're working with animation or when you're working with different pages. You want to create the illusion of different pages. That's what you would use, is the timeline trigger. Now, when you're jumping to different things, you're saying go to this certain point, it's a lot more useful to jump to a label instead of jumping to a specific millisecond or anything like that. Okay, so we're still exploring the different elements in Adobe Edge, and then we'll get into more of this. So hopefully it's a little bit useful to kind of explore what these different parts are, and then you can start putting together your own animation. Now we have a new panel that's really not specific to any other Adobe tool called the Elements tool. Now the Elements, or the Elements panel. Now the Elements panel really is very useful, and it's a little bit different because this actually controls the order, and then this actually controls how different objects as well, or groups objects, or you can toggle like visibility off and on inside of this Elements panel as well. And so this is where you would group an object. Instead of on the layers, you would actually group it within the Elements panel. And this is also, you can select an object and you can add per scripts or per object scripts. saying, okay, on this object, I want to go ahead and have this happen when somebody clicks on it or when somebody touches it or anything like that. And so the elements panel, it takes a little getting used to in my opinion, but you'll notice over if on the left hand side or the right hand side, let's say I wanted to move my rectangle, if I have a couple different rectangles here, let's say I want to move my rectangle 2 above rectangle 3. Well, I can't just grab on the layers here like you can in Flash and rearrange my layers. You actually have to do that within the elements panel. So over on the right hand side, you'll notice in my elements panel I have my stage area, but then I also have my rectangle and my rectangle 2. Well, I can grab my rectangle and move it inside of my elements panel, so now my rectangle 2 is above my rectangle 3. But I can't do that within the layers. That's one thing to keep in mind. But the nice thing is, if I wanted to add different scripts to different objects, I can come over to the left-hand side, and let's say I wanted to add a script on the stage, just anywhere, like let's say I wanted to add a click event on the stage, then I can just click the brackets on my panel here, and then I can say, okay, I want this to happen on a click, and I want it to, whenever someone taps the stage, something's going to happen. I'm not sure exactly what, but that's where you would add that to either the stage, or you can add that to certain objects as well. Or if there's elements already on those objects or scripts on those objects, this is where you can get back to it to kind of change the code as well at a later point. So it does take a little getting used to, but it does have some advantages, so keep that in mind. Then we also have the library panel. Now the library panel is where you have, just like in Flash, if you're familiar with Flash or Photoshop or anything like that, the library is where it has all your different assets or different things that you may be using, external assets that you may be using inside of your Adobe Edge composition, basically. Now it'll list the images and the external images that you've brought in. It'll list the symbols, if you've created a symbol, it'll list what those symbols are, and you can drag those out from the library onto the stage. And then the nice thing about Edge is it'll also list the fonts. You can embed certain fonts inside of your Adobe Edge interaction. So if you're using a custom font that's really typically not used on most people's computers, you may want to embed your font in here. So if the learner doesn't have that font, it's still going to display that font if it's embedded. So keep that in mind. And then once it's embedded, then you can work with those different interactions there. So going back into Adobe Edge, if I come into my project files that you have, I'm going to go into this tabs images, and I'm just going to grab one of these images, and I'm just going to drag it onto the stage here. Now by grabbing that and dragging it onto the stage, you'll notice in my library panel, now I have an images, and then I have images folder first of all, and then I have a button before that's in that library. Now if I decide I'm not going to use this image and I just delete it from the stage, it's technically not deleted from your project. It's still within your project. Because over on the right hand side in your library, you still have that buttons before. So when you publish your project, it'll actually still have that within your project folder. So if you don't want that to be in your project folder, what I would do is right click on that image, go to reveal in Finder or reveal in whatever it is on Windows side, and then it will show you in your images folder in your project this image. Well, if I delete that from my images folder within my project and then come back to Adobe Edge, it says this has been changed outside of Adobe Edge. Do you want to reload it? Well, yes, I do want to reload it because now that image is gone. So just keep that in mind. If you're working with images, instead of having multiple images kind of compile up and you're wondering why your project's so big, you want to delete that completely from the project inside of that folder as well, and then Adobe Edge will just kind of reload it at that point. Okay, so the toolbar we worked with a little bit, we have the selection tool, we have the transform tool. This allows you to transform any object. You'll also have the clipping tool. If you are working with images, for example, and you only want a certain part of that image, you can clip inside of it, and so you can decide what part of the image you want to show. We also have the rectangle tool, rounded rectangle tool, as well as the oval tool, ellipse tool, as well as the text tool if you're going to bring in some text. And then you have the color changing. It allows you to change whatever object you have selected to change the color, as well as the stroke. And the stroke tool is basically, a stroke is the kind of the outline of the object. So if you're not using a stroke, you don't need to change it. But if you are using a stroke, then that's where you can change the color. And then the last one is the layout defaults, how you want it to lay out, how you want it to align. If you want it to automatically resize, you can get to it from there as well. So these aren't too complicated. So I'm going to go back into Adobe Edge, and you'll notice up on the top is where all these tools are. So we've already used the rectangle tool. We've already used the text tool. If I select the text tool, I can select anywhere. And you'll notice this little text box that pops up. You don't type in just in the stage area. You actually type into this text box. And when you type into that text box, if you just hit this exit button, that will just make the text box go away, and then you can just position your object, work with your object there. You can also come over to the left-hand side, and you'll notice your properties has changed. You can change the visibility, the opacity of your object, as well as position, the X, the Y value, the width, the height. For the text, you can change what type of font family you're using, or you can add your own font as well. For the text size, you can go up in size, down in size, alignment as well, color, transform. And then a nice thing here, down at the bottom, you can also have the option to turn on a shadow. So if you wanted there to be a text shadow, for example, you can go ahead and turn that on and adjust the values there. Or you can also turn on clipping if you wanted there to be clipping, if you only wanted to show a certain part of your object as well. Those are down at the bottom. The other nice thing is accessibility. Web is always about accessibility. So if you wanted to add on the accessibility or a title, you come down to the accessibility tab, and then you go ahead and type out a description of what this is real quick, and as well as a tab index. And so if you're making it so it's the person can tab through it, okay, the tab index, this one is going to be 1. That means it's going to go, this is the tab index of 1. When somebody's tabbing, they can get to this by tabbing there. So, okay. I know we don't have too much time, so I'm trying to get through some of these as quickly as possible. But again, refer back to the recording if you can't stay for the whole time, as well as different posts and everything that we're going to do on this. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the menus. You can, you have some standard menus like a range. You have some standard menus like align as well if you wanted to align different objects. Distributes, you can convert to a symbol just like you can in Flash. There's the distribute. You can group elements into a div tag, and so if you wanted to take two different objects and put them into one div tag or one group, basically, you can do that within the modify window. As convert to symbol will take the different objects and it'll make it into a movie clip. Now the nice thing about that is movie clips are just like Flash movie clips. They have their own independent timeline. Now the useful point for this is, let me go ahead and go into, for example, I'm going to delete some of these here. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my button before here. And this button, I want to create a rollover effect. Now you can't really do that. If I was to convert this like by right clicking and going down to convert to symbol, I don't have, like I do in Flash, I don't have the option to do a button or a GIF or an image or a movie clip. I only have a movie clip. That's my only choice basically. So I can't do the button type or anything like that. So the way that if you create a movie clip, so let me just call this option 1. If I'm animating this, for example, you can animate movie clips, but the nice thing is if I come into this movie clip and I double click on it to get into the movie clip, I have a completely separate timeline that I can work with on this movie clip. So if I wanted to, I can actually come in here and add a different image that would be the rollover, and I do that in my other example that I'll show you here in a second. But you can have the image as a rollover, and you can create a button type of movie clip like you do inside of Flash if you're working with that. Okay, we talked a little bit about flexible layouts. Okay. We talked already a little bit about easing. Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit of coding. Okay, so I'm going to go back into here and I'm just going to delete this symbol. Now we're going to add a little bit of code. So for example, I'm going to come back to my home label and I'm just going to add a text or a box here. And I'm going to add some text up on the top that says click the rectangle. So let's say we're going to mock up a question type. So I'm going to click on or add the text click a rectangle. And I'm going to have two different objects. I'm going to have a rectangle here, and then I'm going to have an ellipse tool, or the ellipse, over on the right hand side here. Now if I do this, I have the rectangle, I have the ellipse. Now what I want to happen is I want if they click on the rectangle to take them to a spot that says nope, that was, or yes, that was correct. Or if they click on the ellipse tool, I'm going to take them to a text that says nope, that was incorrect. And so that's where I'm going to have it under these labels here. I'm going to have the first one, I'm going to change that to rectangle. And then on the second one, I'm going to change this one to ellipse. And now I'm going to have jump to these certain points if the learner chooses the certain or different objects. Now, on these different points, I don't want, for example, I don't want the rectangle to show up once you go to rectangle, or maybe I do. But if you want things to hide at certain points of the timeline, you would use a property inside of the properties panel called on or off. So let's go ahead and go back to, for example, I want, before we get to the rectangle, I want the timeline to stop, because I don't want the timeline to get to the rectangle yet until they actually click on the rectangle. So I'm going to add an actions trigger coming up on the top of the layer here. I'm going to add an actions trigger, and I'm going to go ahead and add a stop command. Well, that's all I have to do. I have a stop command right before it gets to the rectangle label. Now on the rectangle label, I'm going to then have some other text that says, yes, that was correct. But I don't want my ellipse tool to actually show once it gets to the rectangle. So what I want to do on the ellipse object here is I want to select it, and in my timeline, I'm going to go to the rectangle label. In my timeline, I'm going to go to the property and turn that off. Now what happens is basically says, okay, from here where it says home until rectangle, you're going to be on. It's going to be visible. By the time you get to the rectangle, it's going to be off. And so that way I can hide things when I get to certain points in my stage. And so I'll keep the rectangle here, but once it gets to the rectangle, that's what I want to show. I want the ellipse to actually be invisible, and I want my rectangle to still be visible. And maybe we don't need the instructions anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and just turn that one off as well, saying at this point of the timeline, this does not need to be visible. Well, I'm going to add, as if I just jump to this right now, it's going to just play and then come back to the very beginning. So what I need to do is, before it gets to the ellipse tool, is add another stop command. If I add another stop command, what will happen is if I jump to the rectangle, it'll play this little thing if I want to animate something in, and then it will stop right before it gets to the ellipse. Because I don't want it to get to the ellipse, because I only want it to go to the ellipse if they select the ellipse. So keep that in mind. Now, one thing I also notice is if I scroll to the home section, so I'm kind of separating my timeline into different pages, but if I scroll to the home section, my text for yes, that is correct is still visible. It's behind the ellipse there. And so I want to do the opposite there. I want to, instead of hiding it or at that point, I want to show it at that point. And so the way that I do that is by selecting the object, coming up to the always on, and if I select that drop down box, instead of off, at this point I want it to turn on. So that means every point in the timeline up until this point, it's going to be off until it gets to this point. And once it gets to this point, it's then going to be on. And so that's what I have so far. If I hit save and then control enter, you'll notice that I don't see my text below here, and it doesn't animate through. It just basically stops at that first stop. But now I want to animate it through. I want to, if you add a little command saying, if you click on this rectangle, go to this object. Now if I come back into my home section, I'm going to select on the rectangle, and the way that you add an action script, or sorry, not action script, but the way that you add some code to this object is by coming up to the properties panel, or coming down to the stage area, or actually coming over to your elements. You select on the brackets. You can do it either one of those, basically. It doesn't matter. But But if I select the brackets there, I have a couple different options that pop open here. Up on the top bar here says that I'm adding some code to rectangle 4, and I have a couple different things that I can do. I can add a click, a double click, a mouse over, mouse down, mouse move, mouse up, mouse out, touch start if you're targeting tablets or anything like that. You can do a touch start, touch move, touch end, and then you can do a couple other things as well. Focus using jQuery, mouse enter using jQuery, different things like that. I'm going to do a simple click. The click does work on tablets as well, touchscreen devices, so keep that in mind. But right now I'm just going to do a click here. And now I'm going to come over to the right-hand side, and I'm going to click on where it says play from. This means that when this is clicked, it's going to play at a certain point. So I'm going to click on play from, and it adds some milliseconds. It adds a code sim.play, and then adds some milliseconds. Well, I'm not worried about milliseconds right now. I'm actually going to jump to a certain label. So to do that, I just go ahead and add the quote marks, and then I type in the name of the label. Now the name of the label is rectangle that I want to jump to. So I'm going to go ahead and just add rectangle here. And now if I hit Control S, that's the code panel will automatically go away. If I hit Command Enter or Control Enter, it'll take me to preview my interaction. And now if I click on the rectangle, it will take me to that point in the timeline. And this works on a tablet. You can it's HTML basically, and so you can jump to different points in your timeline using the simple little clicks. Instead of knowing the code, you can jump to certain points inside of your timeline. Now I want to do the same thing here for the ellipse tool. I don't want the ellipse tool to well, if they select the ellipse tool, I want it to go ahead and show the ellipse tool at that point. So what I need to do is I need to hide the rectangle at this point. So I'm going to come in and say, okay, at this point for the rectangle, it's going to be off if they get to the ellipse part. I need to drag my timeline over to the ellipse area. And then I need to do on the text area as well. I need to go ahead and drag and say, okay, this is going to be off as well. And I want my ellipse to actually show at this point. Right now it's displayed as off. So if I add a keyframe, I can change this back to on. And you'll notice that I'm basically turning off and on at certain points in my timeline, different objects. Now I'm going to add another text field and say, nope, this is the ellipse tool. Forgive my spelling here. This is the ellipse object. And I don't want this to show until it gets to the ellipse. And so I do that by turning it on once I'm at this timeline. So that means up to this point, the ellipse tool is going to be off. Or sorry, the ellipse text is going to be off. Now, if I did not add a stop command at the end of the ellipse, it basically would run and then just basically jump back to the home. And we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to give it a little time and then just add a stop command at the end of my ellipse. And by adding that stop command, now I need to jump to this ellipse part. So if I come back into my ellipse object and I say, okay, add an action here if I want to click on it, or if it gets clicked on, you want to play from, add a label here, and I want it to play from the ellipse part. Hit save. And now if I hit the rectangle, it'll go to the rectangle. But let me reload this. If I hit the ellipse tool, it'll now go to the ellipse section. So you can jump to different parts, and you can use them kind of as pages, the different parts in your timeline. You can use them as pages to jump to different parts of it. Now, I did this with the tabs interaction that you guys downloaded, if you downloaded the project files. I did this same type of thing with the tabs, and for a little bit more time, I want to explore how I did this so you can actually go in and you can tweak it. So a couple different things that I did is I have a hover state that if I hover over it, you can click on it and basically it'll scroll in at a certain point anything about that option 1, and I can go exit out of that, scroll in option 2, and it's just like a little click to reveal interaction basically. Now these click to reveal interactions, let me close out of this and go into the project file, and you can do this as well. If I go into the project file here, I go into the tabs and then go into tabs left. you'll notice on the timeline, I have basically just a bunch of different labels, and I have a stop command right before each of those labels. And then what I'm doing is I'm animating certain points. I'm fading in certain parts here. If I turn all these different layers on, you can see that I'm basically animating on different, like option 4, I'm animating in option 4. On option 5, I'm animating in option 5. And so it's just simple animations that we learned about. That I'm taking them from off the screen, just basically some text and a button. I'm taking them from off the screen and then I'm bringing them on. Now I added a command on this exit button that you'll see here. I added a command that will just take you back to the home. So whenever you click on the exit button, let me control enter again. Whenever you click on the exit button, it basically just takes you home. And so coming to, like, for example, my exit button, going to the actions, that's pretty much all that I have here. Sim.play and equals home, basically, and that will take you back to the home. And what I have on the options here, if I go to the tab and go to click here, all I'm doing is saying, okay, if you click on option 1, you're going to go to the label option 1, which option 1 will just scroll in that option 1 text at that point. Now I have a couple other things that I'm doing here. I also have a mouse. You can add as many events as you want to this one object, this tab 1. Now on the mouse over, what I'm doing is I'm saying inside of this tab there's a hover state as well. And because I want it to change the color as soon as I hover over it. So if I roll over it, you'll notice that we don't have buttons inside of Adobe Edge. And so this is why the kind of way that I had to work it a little bit is inside of Adobe Edge, you can create this into a symbol, which I created the option 1 into a symbol. If I double click to get into that symbol, you'll notice I have two different states in that symbol. I have a normal state and I have an over state. Now I'm doing the same thing that I did with my main timeline. I add a stop command right before the over state so it doesn't just kind of animate through. And then I have a stop command at the end of my over state. Now what I'm doing is I have two images inside of my timeline. Now one is button over and one is button before. Now on those I'm saying, okay, if you're on the normal state, only the button before will show, and if you're on the over state, only the button over will show at that point. And I did that with the same thing that I just showed you of turning things off and turning things on. Now from the stage area though, if I go back to the actions panel, what I'm doing here is if somebody rolls over or mouses over that tab or that option, what I want to do is say, okay, tab 1, which is the name of this tab here, you can see in your properties over on the top left-hand side is tab 1. What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, tab 1, I want you to play I want you to go to the label over. Now, it's a little bit different than just adding the phrase tab 1. You actually have to add sim.getSymbol, and then add in what symbol you're talking about, and then what command you want it to do. You want it to play the over, and so what that does is whenever I mouse over it, it's going to go to the over label. And then I also have to add a mouse out, saying, okay, once you mouse out, once your mouse goes away from it, then you want to say go back to normal. So tab 1 dot play, go back to normal. Now that works great, but on tablets, it doesn't work that great because tablets don't have a mouse over. So I add a couple different commands specifically for targets or for tablets. And that is the touch start. If I added a plus here, there's a touch start and a touch end. And on the touch start means that whenever you touch it and you're holding it down, I want it to go over. And whenever you let it go, which is the touch end, I want it to go back to normal. So if we were to take this, and let me pull up my iOS simulator here. And I apologize, I haven't gotten to many of the questions yet, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here in a little bit on questions, but I'm going to pull up my simulator, and I'm going to show you what this looks like in the simulator. Now, if you have a Mac, for example, you can get Xcode for free, and when you get Xcode for free, you get the simulator. So even if you don't know Xcode, having the simulator is nice, especially when you're trying to target different or target mobile, for example. What you can do, if you don't even have an iPad, this will still work. You can drag over your HTML file with Safari pulled up, and it will actually open up your HTML file so you can preview it inside of an iPad basically. Now in this case, I don't have a mouse over, I don't have a mouse out, so it's really not working there. What does happen, as soon as I press and I hold on it, it then switches over to the mouse over, the over state in that symbol, and when I let go, it switches out. So if I just tap on it real quick, it basically is just a quick way to see that you still selected it. So it's just a visual, a little bit more visually appealing than not having it selected at all. And so it's simple code, but you just have to add it in certain spots as well. Now the other thing I'm doing is I'm changing the color of the text, because the text here is just one color. It's kind of a dark color, but when I switch to a dark theme, it doesn't look that good. So what I'm doing is saying on the mouse over is I'm saying, and this is jQuery actually, you're calling that option text, we can get the label there, .css, and then you're going to change the color attribute, and I'm going to change it to white. Now when I roll out, I'm going to change it back to the color that it was before basically. And that's really all that I'm doing for this tab interaction. And basically whenever I click on it, it scrolls into that section. When I click on the exit, it takes me back to the home as well. Okay, let me see if there's any questions on that specifically. Is there a feature for like mouse over? Yes, mouse over, if you click on it and you go back to the code, there is a feature for that. What is the possibility of integrating final animations from Edge into other programs like Adobe Captivate or Premiere Pro? Adobe Captivate, if I think you can bring in other HTML objects inside of Adobe Captivate. That's great. You can do that inside of here as well. So it basically produces the HTML file. So let's talk about that for now. So if I go to File and then I go Publish, what happens is you don't really see anything. If I go to the folder though, I now have a published folder. Now within that published folder, I have a web folder, and in that web folder is all of the different objects that I need for the final published version of it. Now I can take this folder and I can then bring it inside of another application. So like Captivate, for example, you can bring that inside of another application. Or you can zip up that folder and you can actually also, you can upload it to Rapid Intake, you can upload it to Captivate, you can bring it inside of Storyline or anything like that. And it's basically just you just created one page that you can then bring into different types of interactions. Now, because I'm with Rapid Intake, I'm going to go ahead and just show you real quick how to bring that inside of our authoring tool as well. And so if inside of this authoring tool, what I do after I created my project is I go ahead and click on Add a Page, and there's a new option for our mobile called Custom HTML5 Page. If I select on the Custom HTML5 page, it's basically just a page that I just go ahead and fill out the content. Let's just say sample, and so I'm going to go ahead and hit next here. And I have a couple different options. I can either use the editor and just type out some custom HTML5 myself, or I can switch the drop down box to upload. I can upload the content inside of the tool here. If I click on upload, you'll notice I already uploaded one interaction, but I'm going to go ahead and upload the tab one that we've been working with. And so I'm going to select on the tab left one and then upload that here. You want to zip up the entire folder because all of the JavaScript files and images and everything need to be in there. It's going to just take that and convert it for a second. And then I'm going to insert selected, and now if I preview this, you'll notice this is another example that I did. You can just tap on it and it will bring open the difference. It's very similar to the tabs one. But if I go to that page that we've been working with here, I didn't do any flexible layouts. I may want to just revisit that with the flexible layouts here, but you'll notice that as soon as I click on it, it works inside of the course player, which this course player is SCORM, or if you bring it in Captivate, you can make that SCORM 1.2 or 2004 compliant as well, and this can be 1.2 or 2004. And so it's really kind of piecing these different interactions together inside of a course player and adding quiz functionality or anything like that inside of your content. So And that's how you bring it into anything else. I'm not sure about Premiere Pro though, because it's video, if it handles HTML. It's been a while since I've done anything like that. So, all right, so we have about 15 minutes. Now, because I haven't really spent much time on questions, I'm going to go ahead and go through the questions at this point. Keep a lookout for different tutorials. Keep a lookout for this recording as well. You can review this recording. If it kind of went over your head, you can review this recording at another time. Go to the same place that you went to actually sign in or to sign up for this webinar, and that way you will have a link to go back to or to review this. If you don't know, or if you go to YouTube, we'll basically be posting this on our YouTube channel, so you can go to YouTube once this video is edited and uploaded to YouTube, and you can review it at that time. Go ahead and download my files. I'm going to bring that back up here. And so if you haven't downloaded the sample files, if you came in late, download the sample files, take a look through the Adobe Edge files, and go ahead and just play around with those as well. So at this point, if you don't have any questions, feel free to take off. If you do have questions, or you had questions earlier that haven't been answered yet, I'm going to go through some of these questions and hopefully answer them at that point, or answer what I can. But again, if you don't have any questions, feel free to take off, and thank you for taking the time to take a look at this tutorial here. All right, so one of the questions is, does Edge actually produce apps or just HTML5? It produces HTML5. It does not produce apps. However, inside of Adobe Edge, you can go to Publish Settings, and you can go into iBooks Author, and you can produce an iBooks Author widget. Now, the iBooks Author widget is the same thing as a kind of a widget inside of Mac, so it could be installed on a Mac as well. But the iBooks Author, you can then bring it into an iBooks, and you can have whatever interaction you just built in Adobe Edge inside of there. Now, if you're building something for the actual application, then you would need to wrap this up inside of PhoneGap. So you need to take your published file, wrap it up in PhoneGap, and then create an actual application for it at that point. Oh, one other thing is, am I going to cover audio? Good question, actually. I'm glad you reminded me of that. With the audio, there's one thing that you need to do. Edge does not have a way to animate to audio. It has a way to play audio, but you need to do that in normal JavaScript, basically. So at a certain point, whether you want the audio to play when the person clicks the button, or if you want the audio to play as soon as they come to a certain page, or as soon as it loads, you need to basically establish a variable. And so you establish a var, and this is in my notes as well, so you can refer to this in the slides. You need to establish a variable, and you need to say new audio, and then in the parentheses and quotations, you have the path to that audio. Now, in this path is just going to a path on the website, but you can have it if you have somewhere inside of your project folder, like audio, inside of an audio folder, you can play it from there. And then at that point, you just say, okay, variable.play. And that's really all that you do, and that will, again, you can't really time it up to the audio. Adobe Edge has said from blog posts that they will support that in future releases, but right now it's not supported. For now, you just do it inside of a trigger. Now, that also brings up video. Now, video, let me show you this real quick. Video, you don't have a way to import video inside of Adobe Edge. In order to do that, you actually have to create a variable and add it as an iframe. And you can do that with JavaScript here. So I'm going to go ahead and select this text, and again, this is in my notes and slides and everything, so you can refer back to it. But I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to just create a symbol. So right-click, convert to symbol, and I'm going to name this box 2. Now, the reason why is because I already have that in my code here. But I'm then going to say, okay, in my actions layer, I'm going to paste in this box 2. Now, the box 2 is basically saying, okay, get the symbol box 2, and we're going to put it inside of a variable called box sample. You can name that whatever you want. And then we're going to grab an iframe from YouTube. And so I just named it YouTube equals, and then added this iframe. So you grab the iframe code, whatever the code is, and it doesn't have to be a video. It can be something else. And then you name it box, you grab the box sample, and you're going to say the HTML for this is going to be the YouTube. And so it's going to grab this HTML, and that's what the HTML is going to be. Well, now if I hit Control Enter, you'll notice that it brought in my YouTube, and I may want to resize the iframe and everything. Actually, the stage size. If I resize the stage size, that should be better. There we go. So now it's brought in my YouTube video. If I hit play, the YouTube video will work just great, and this could be a regular HTML5 tag iframe that you wanted to do. But the nice thing is you can then animate this box. And so if I wanted to animate it, I then just animated my video. So if you want the video to kind of scroll in or anything like that, you can do that as well. So that's how you do audio and video. Database interactivity, yes, you can do that through jQuery. Adobe Edge is integrated with jQuery. That's the nice thing. There's other tools like Hype that I've learned as well, like Tumult Hype. It's a great tool. I love Hype. But the Edge, Adobe Edge has a little bit of an edge in the way that they can actually integrate. They're more integrated with jQuery. You can still do a little bit with Adobe or with Tumult Type, and you can integrate with jQuery, but it takes a little bit more than just starting to add jQuery commands. With Adobe Edge, you can just start adding jQuery. So you would have to do that in order to start integrating with databases and stuff. Can Adobe Edge also publish to Swift or a comparable file? That's a great question. That's actually a question that I didn't expect to get until the past couple of days. I started getting it more and more. Adobe Edge is not a replacement for Flash. In my opinion, it's a replacement for Flash for people who are specifically wanting to do HTML. But it's not a replacement to do different SWFs. That's still where Flash comes into play. Now, Flash does have the ability to export to HTML5 now, but they use different than Adobe Edge. Adobe Edge is just specifically targeted to HTML. They're not targeted towards Flash or anything, or Swifts or anything like that. So it's not a Swift compiler or anything like that. Just to confirm, audio and video can be played back at the same time. If you hit play on the audio or on the video here, you would have to add some type of trigger to play the audio at the same time. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, is because it's not within the timeline, depending on the person's connection, they may have the audio start before the video. So syncing things up is just not there yet. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend playing audio, but making it so it's not dependent on the timeline at all. And so there's just a couple things to keep in mind there. Can you provide links to other products needed to package output, iPad, phone apps, or Mac software needed? The best link is just if you Google PhoneGap or just go to phonegap.com. This will allow you to package in or even upload your HTML content, and it will package it for you to Android, iOS, and everything like that. So that's the best resource that I know of as well. For Captivate objects in Adobe Edge, does it have to be Captivate 6? I'm not familiar enough with Captivate to actually know that. I would recommend going to Adobe and talking about that, saying, okay, I have HTML5 content. Can I bring that inside of Captivate? Okay. Can you do drag and drop? Yes, you can do drag and drop. Actually, you can do that, but you have to do it through the jQuery way of doing drag and drop. I don't have enough time to go over that. It's a little bit more tricky, but you can add that jQuery commands to start drag, stop drag as well, so that is doable. I couldn't get to the website to download the files. Let me see. Okay, I got it here, so it might be your firewall to keep that so take a look into that. I cannot seem to find a download link for Adobe Edge at the URL provided. It takes me to the Creative Cloud. You do have to sign up for the Creative Cloud, Karen. And once you sign up for the Creative Cloud, they have an application manager that downloads. And you don't have to pay for it yet, from my understanding at least. You don't have to pay for it yet. And then you can install Adobe Edge at that point. I did go over, in our last conference, I did go over and help people how to do that, and they were able to download it and install it without having to pay for it. So I do know that it is possible there. Have you noticed a difference with published Edge content and how it functions on iPad versus Android tablets? With Adobe Edge is actually, for the nice thing, it's very compatible between Android and iOS. Now, that's not always true. There are maybe some things that you run into, but it just depends on the situation. I'm not sure everything that you can do right off the top of your head, but one thing that we didn't get a time to talk about is the down level stage. On the down level stage, if I click on Edit, this is basically what shows, and you can add text, and this is what shows if someone tries to go to it from a non-compatible device, whatever device it is. And you can just add text to say, you should go to this URL from a different device or something like that. So it's not just going to not work, it's going to show them instructions on what they should do. As well as the preloader. If I click on preloader and click on edit right here, I can actually insert preloader clip art, and I can insert like a progress bar. If I click on insert, and I can have a progress bar, so that progress bar basically shows before the content gets loaded. Can Edge Animate import 3D objects and create 3D software? From my understanding, no. You can import SVG content, so it makes it vector-based content, and you can import that and use that for resizing and everything. How different is Adobe Dreamweaver, Captivate, and Presenter? How different from Adobe Dreamweaver? Nice thing is you can actually take the HTML from Adobe Edge, open it up in Dreamweaver, make your changes, and then open it back up in Edge. And so Adobe has made it really nice to go through cross platforms. Captivate and Presenter, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in Captivate or Presenter by any means. Sorry, I'm just going through the rest of the questions. If you don't have any more questions, feel free to take off. Otherwise, I am going through the rest of these here. One comment that someone made is don't put a www in that URL. If you put www in the URL, it's true. If you put that, then you won't get the files, and so maybe that might be some of the issues people are having. Can we open up Adobe Captivate files in Edge? You can open up pretty much any HTML file. I'm not sure how compatible it'll be once you save it or anything, but that's one thing that you may want to explore. Is this product that requires internet connection in order to use it? No. The output you'll want to put on the internet eventually, but unless you're doing some statements to grab a database or something like that, you won't need to have an internet connection. One question was, I hope you talk about this inside of the RI tool. I did, so hopefully that helps. Can you resize the fits or to fit inside of an RA course, or does it overlap the menu? No, you can fit it. If you do the resize, the pixels, change that to percentage, you can make it so it will fit inside of there perfectly. Can Flash latest version be used to create a similar output? It actually can if you use the crate.js. You still have to use JavaScript within there. The nice thing about Edge is it actually walks you through some of the JavaScript and you just click on the buttons. And so it's not always, you don't have to memorize the JavaScript. And that's the nice thing about it. But they do have help on there. How hard is it to have two versions of the course in RI, one in HTML5 and the other one Flash-based using RI built-ins? That's a great question, Susan. You basically, if you have a Flash-based course, a Flash and mobile-based course, you can have a SWF for the Flash side. So if a learner comes to it from their desktop, they'll see the Flash animation, and if they go to the same page from their desktop, they can see the Adobe Edge animation in the same page interaction. So you would have to build it twice because Edge doesn't output to Swift. But you can have the Adobe Edge for the mobile side, and you can have Adobe Flash for the Flash side of it as well. Peter, we did talk a little bit about audio integration. I would recommend going over the tutorial or this recording at a later point, and you can review that. One person says, I've installed Adobe Apps Manager. Edge does not show up in the apps list. I would have to recommend you to Adobe to see why that would not show up. Can the output of Adobe Edge Animate work offline without an internet connection? Yes, we addressed that a little bit. Will the outputs as vector? If you have SVGs and you bring SVG images in there, then yes, it will output as, as vector. One person said the Adobe Manager there, so it probably depends on your account. You may want to check with Adobe. Can ActionScript 2 code be used to animate? No, ActionScript 2 code is not JavaScript code. And so, I mean, if you know ActionScript 2, JavaScript is not too off. And so, but ActionScript 2 code does not animate inside of Adobe Edge. It can. I'm not sure if that transfers over when you published from Flash or not, but. What is the mobile interface previewer that you were using? That is with Xcode. If you're on a Mac, it's called the iOS simulator. Peter, another question that you had, did you discuss tying animations to audio and how it's to use audio triggers? Now, audio cannot trigger something within the animation as far as what I'm able to figure out so far, but you can trigger different audio files to play at certain points in your timeline. Now, you cannot time, and this is one thing that still frustrates me about HTML5, and whoever figures this out is going to be really awesome. Basically, you cannot at this point time up your audio to animations, at least inside of tools like Adobe Edge and Hype or anything like that. Adobe says they're working on it, but they haven't got to that, and it's a very hard thing to do. If you're not on a Mac, you can use other simulation tools, or you can use just regular devices like iPhone or iOS devices, iPads, or anything like that. One thing that somebody did mention is Adobe Edge Animate does require Windows 7 or 8. And so if you have XP, that may be the reason why you're not seeing it. HTML produce backward compatibility with non-HTML5 browsers. That's where the down level stage where it doesn't animate, but there is something that Google does produce. If you go to Edge Animate or go to Publish Settings, and then you go to Animate, right here, Web, under Web, use Google Chrome frame of IE6, IE7, and IE8. What this does is it actually prompts the person to, if they're on IE6, it'll prompt the person to install something. If they install it, then it will actually work on IE6, but it does require them to install it. If it doesn't install, then it will just show the poster frame, whatever you put up there, basically. Karen, if you have XP, then yes, you do need Windows 7 or Windows 8 in order to install Edge. Beth, the reason why you're not getting to that URL is probably because of your firewall. So you'll need to go outside of your firewall in order to get to that URL for the files. Okay, so we're a little over time. There are still some questions I haven't gotten to. So feel free to review this recording once we have it. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to one of our representatives.